My dear friends, I recently saw for the first time a movie that you absolutely do need to see, and that continues my year of Mel Gibson movies, The Bounty. So let me pitch you this cast. A young Mel Gibson, a younger Anthony Hopkins, Laurence Olivier, Bernard Hill, the King of Rohan, Daniel Day-Lewis, a young Liam Neeson, and more. Do I have your attention yet? When the opening credits start, you see Dino De Laurentiis' name show up. Now, if you see the name Dino De Laurentiis involved in the making of a movie, you can take it to the bank that ambition is going to be involved in this production. You might remember him from a movie called Conan, but after his name shows up on the screen, it's minutes before we see a single person show up, and honestly, it's the most engrossing opening credit sequence I've seen. Like I said, not a person in sight, but the visuals paired with the soundtrack. Oh, it's haunting, and it dragged me into it and did not let go for the rest of the movie. And it's quite a lengthy movie, but what we're doing here is a retelling of the historical event, the Mutiny on the Bounty. There's a lot of drama involved here, and a lot of tits. A lot of really nice Polynesian tits. If Mel Gibson did not love his role in this movie, for the simple fact that there's at least 2 scenes where his main job is to make out with a topless hot Polynesian chick in the waves, then I got my questions about Mel. But really, Anthony Hopkins carries this movie. Daniel Day-Lewis mostly stands there and smirks. He doesn't get a whole lot to work with. Laurence Olivier, he was really old by the time this movie came out, so he was a little bit wasted, but it was still nice to see him. Liam Neeson is a thug and comes across very effectively as a thug, but with some depth to him. So he is relatable in his insubordination. Bernard Hill's character is bound by duty, even though it winds up costing him. The scenes and so plot are expertly framed around a trial of Anthony Hopkins' captain that lost control of the bounty to a bunch of mutineers. And I found it to be a very effective framing device and useful for ratcheting up tension scene by scene. And shot almost all on location, this movie does a great job of grounding the cinematic experience in the real world and in the time, and seeing all that through the eyes of these Englishmen who were sailing across the frigging world on some fitted together timbers on massive, cruel seas, and going to lands full of people not at all like them, all in the name of paying the cost to be the boss. Yes, European powers conquered and colonized much of the world, but there was a price paid by the men who did the sailing, that did the fighting, that made it happen. And this movie really shows how that wears on them, because the captain of the ship, he's got children and a wife. Well, at best, he was going to be gone for most of a year to do a simple job of retrieving some breadfruit from Tahiti and taking it to Jamaica. It takes way longer than a year for all this to unravel. That alone wears on him. And the fact that you're isolated on this tiny boat with all these other dudes who all have their own neuroses, problems, criminal behaviors, creates a powder keg to where I'm shocked any navies did their job at all. And that's why I joined the Army, because if my transport broke down, I could walk wherever I was going to go. But at sea, death was all around you all the time. And it was in the ship with you as well. This is a terrifying place to be. But these men saw it through, some of them, and some of them broke and made their own way, even at the cost of all kinds of lives and friendships. Honor was destroyed, reputations ruined, and that's a story I think a lot more people should experience, because the real world outside of the relatively comfortable West, and especially of the past, it was a hard place. A place conquered only by muscle, wood, steel, fire, violence, and will. There was a lot of courage in these men. And in the frequent clashes between the captain, his leaders, and the crew, and then the crew with each other, really took me back to when I was an Army officer, and occasionally I had to butt heads with my subordinates because I was the officer, I could issue commands, they had to obey me. And sometimes a man doesn't want to obey, and then that officer has to find a way to enforce his will. And sometimes you get a physical bumping of chest, sometimes it's just an intimidation game, but it's a real thing. It is a domination game going on. And too many people lose sight of the fact that man, like all other animals, exists to dominate in some form or another. And if you're not the one doing the dominating, you're the one being dominated, whether you know it or not. This is a thoroughly masculine movie, much like The Man Who Would Be King, who I'm definitely going to review on here. And it speaks to discipline and manly virtues. Even if they sometimes fail, you know what the right values to hold are, and it's whether you're strong enough to live up to them or not. And one last thing that really stuck out to me about this movie that differentiates it from others is the effectiveness of the nonverbal communication the actors employ in this movie, particularly Anthony Hopkins, but all of them do it. So this is a masterclass in acting, the different ways you can get across emotions, ideas, conflict. So I absolutely recommend it. You should check it out, The Bounty.